Admare usque admare. It's Canada's official motto. But is that becoming more outdated thanks to Canada's lacking passenger railway? Despite being part of the foundation of this country, passenger railway has taken a back seat to other forms of travel such as planes and even cars. According to the University of Toronto, Canada is the only G7 nation without high-speed passenger rail. What are they doing to bridge this gap? Take a trip with me as we explore the future of high-speed rail in Canada.
Merci.
The train I'm on right now is the model via commission just this past year, the new Siemens Venture. It can go up to 201 kilometers an hour. Compared to the previous model, this is a 40-kilometer increase. This new model is the one that would be used on the high-frequency line between Toronto and Quebec City the federal government is proposing. This line would be a high-frequency service, meaning the trains would now get new track and arrive more frequently. But they wouldn't be considered high speed since the trains would need to reach speeds of at least 250 kilometers an hour to qualify for that. So how much of a difference would high-frequency rail actually make? To help me find the answer, I spoke with Ryan Katz-Rosene, an assistant professor at the University of Ottawa. He did his PhD thesis on the prospect of high-speed rail in Canada.
What decision makers should be working towards is a system of transport that allows people to get between cities, not just in the QWC, but across Canada, between major urban areas, that's affordable, efficient, climate-friendly, and accessible, right? Like that's what we want, and that brings communities together. High-frequency rail offers a lot of benefits that we don't have right now with the older, kind of more antiquated service. But it's not, again, it doesn't offer a solution to all of these outcomes.
As of 2023, 25 different studies have been done on high-speed rail in the corridor over the past 50 years. None of them have been implemented, and I asked why that may be.
The group that's going to be selected to build and operate the high-frequency line is going to be a private entity. And that effectively turns this project into a public-private partnership. And that makes me a little bit worried for a number of reasons. One of them is that just historically, there's been a lot of risk involved in public-private partnerships. When you bring in the private sector, there's potential for miscommunication because fundamentally we have different objectives. The private sector has a pretty clear objective of obtaining profit, right? The public sector doesn't necessarily have that objective, although historically in Canada, governments have, because of this sort of neoliberal context, have kind of approached public spending in this view of like, oh, well, we need to get financial returns.
Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to all of our witnesses. Thanks for being with us this evening.
I spoke with NDP MP and transport critic Taylor Bachrach on the state of the proposal.
We need to build this so that it's future-proof, so that we're looking down the road decades and decades. And in many ways, Canada only has one chance to get this right on the corridor. We're talking about a project that will cost tens of billions of dollars. And we need to look carefully at the benefits of a high-speed rail line versus high-frequency.
With the current high-frequency proposal, a supposed cheaper alternative to a high-speed model, already expected to surpass its $6 to $12 billion proposed budget, Bachrach wonders why we shouldn't just go the extra mile.
We're talking about a government that has invested $30 billion in an oil pipeline and yet can't invest in high-speed rail. It seems like maybe the priorities aren't where they need to be, especially in an era of runaway climate change.
Canada has set an emissions plan to become carbon neutral by 2050. One way of reducing that carbon load is by becoming less and less dependent on heavily polluting forms of transit like planes and cars. Trains have been seen as a greener alternative. But does this new high-frequency line really entice people to choose the train over any other alternative?
It's a more enjoyable way to travel. I think most people feel that, and they kind of long for a future where we sit on trains and not sit on planes. But in order to do that, you need to have fast trains. You need to be able to get from point A to point B within about 2 hours of the time it would take to fly. And with HFR, I don't think they quite get there.
It took me 2 hours and 4 minutes to get from Ottawa to Montreal on one of the proposed trains for the high-frequency line. As Ottawa is 200 kilometers away from Montreal, we were traveling at an average speed of just below 100 kilometers an hour. With the high-frequency proposal, the maximum speed would be 200 kilometers an hour, but the train won't be traveling at that speed all the time. If we had a high-speed rail line with the average travel speeds of France's TGV, which was established in 1981, that number would fall to under 45 minutes.
Jackson is joining us now to talk about this a little bit more. So Jackson, if the government decides to go with a high-frequency project, what does that mean for the future of high-speed rail in the corridor?
It's a very interesting question that you ask, and if the federal government chooses to go ahead with a high-frequency line, not a high-speed type of model, Katz-Rosene does have his doubts about the future of high-speed travel in the corridor.
If the current high-frequency rail project, which I think will be approved, which I think will be passed, if it doesn't have a high-speed component, we may not see high-speed rail in the QWC, in the Quebec-Windsor corridor, ever.
So Jackson, what is next for this project?
Yeah, 3 construction teams have now been selected to advance in the bidding process, and after that the federal government is going to ask them to submit 2 separate proposals, one for a high-frequency line, another for a high-speed rail line. They're expected to submit those by the summer of 2024, after which the government is expected to accept one of the proposals by the fall of 2024, so about a year from now.
Thanks, Jackson.